Wow. This morning's reading is from Matthew chapter 4, verses 12 through 23. Now when Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. He left Nazareth and made his home in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, on the road by the sea, across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light, and for those who sat in the region and the shadow of death, light has dawned. From that time, Jesus began to proclaim, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of the people." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, in the boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Jesus went through all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. Holy wisdom, holy word.
I just love it when the Spirit weaves things together. The anthem this morning was one of the pieces that was sung at my dad's funeral. And I've been thinking about my dad. My dad has been very present with me as I've prepared for this morning because my dad loved to fish. For nearly 50 years, my family had a cottage on a little green lake in Kentucky, and we spent most weekends and every summer there. My dad would get up early in the morning, fill his thermos with fresh brewed Folgers coffee, and head down to the dock where his tackle box, landing net, and fishing rod were stowed in the boat, ready to go. Occasionally, others might join him, one of us kids or maybe one of his buddies from the lake, but most often my dad went out alone. He loved the beauty of the lake in the early morning. The mist rising off the water, the surface just as smooth as glass. And in the quiet of the morning, he would listen to the day begin. Birds waking into song. There was a bullfrog we named the Mister, and he'd listen to the Mister advertising himself to the ladies. He'd listen to the thrum of the trolling motor as Dad moved from one fishing spot to another. And he'd spend an hour or two out there, more often than not coming home with a bass or maybe a couple of crappie or a catfish. He'd clean them up, and my mom would either fry them up for breakfast or put them in the freezer for another meal at another time. Later in life, driven by compassion or maybe just not wanting to mess with cleaning them, I don't know which, he instituted Jack's Fish Amnesty Program through the practice of catch and release. Fishing was my dad's hobby, and he loved it. It was a purely recreational pursuit for him, unlike for the disciples that we meet in this morning's gospel passage. For Simon Peter and Andrew, for James and John, fishing was their work. It's how they and their families survived in their hometown of Capernaum, a fishing village of about 1,500 people on the northwest shore of the freshwater Sea of Galilee. It's likely that they were subsistence fishermen, laboring as very small players in a major industry that made the rich even richer. If they were lucky enough to haul in a catch for the day, they saw most of their profits eaten up by an oppressive and crooked system designed to benefit people in power. Tax collectors, toll men, patrons, the governor, and ultimately the emperor himself profited at the expense of the little guy. Fishing was grueling and dehumanizing work within an unjust imperial economy. We might marvel at how these men dropped everything to follow Jesus. We think, what courage, or such trust. Those of us more risk-averse are shocked and think secretly to ourselves, that is so impulsive. What were they thinking? Maybe Zebedee was there in the boat, shaking his head and thinking to himself, I just don't know about these boys of mine. They'll swallow anything, hook, line, and sinker. We don't know what was going on in the heads and hearts of these first disciples. The text doesn't help us here. Maybe they were fed up with lives of quiet desperation, floundering in the net of imperial subjugation and exploitation. Perhaps they jumped at the chance to escape the daily grind and set out on a new adventure, one that Jesus promised would transform them from being people who fish to being fishers of people. I wonder if they scratched their heads trying to figure out what the heck Jesus meant by that. Preacher David Lowes suggests that they probably had no idea what he meant at this point, but that they do know that Jesus sees something in them of value and worth. And they hear his invitation as a call to a new identity and purpose. While they have no idea where they'll go or what they will do, they do know that Jesus is calling them into a new way of being. And they trust that the rest will become clear in time. With their wholehearted response to Jesus' call, each disciple steps out of a transactional life of doing and into a relational way of being that will draw people in and set them free. Catch and release Jesus style. Now, I confess to you that I wrestle with what it looks like to be a fisher of people in this day and time. How to share the good news in a way that is compelling, that draws people in rather than offends or puts them off. I struggle with what it means to be a small e evangelical Christian at a time when evangelism is too often associated with wild-eyed street corner preachers, coercive proselytization, bait and switch church growth strategies, and unholy alliances brokered for political power. I wonder if you struggle too. In my work as a clinical chaplain, I adhere to an ethical code that prohibits me from proselytization. I'm trained and tasked to meet people where they are and work within their own framework of religious, spiritual, or secular understanding, not mine. Every day in my role at the VA, I meet people who have been turned off by organized religion, by what they see reflected in the news, by what they hear from those who identify themselves as Jesus followers, and by personal experiences of judgment and exclusion that leave lasting spiritual wounds, or at least a real bad taste in the mouth. It makes me angry. It also makes me very, very sad. And I also realize that I feel a sense of guilt, even shame by association. I find myself on the defensive, wanting people to know that I'm not that kind of Christian. Frankly, I sometimes feel the need to apologize on the church's behalf. Often, these folks and many others I visit with identify themselves as spiritual, but not religious. Others identify loosely with the Christian worldview, having grown up in the church and fallen away. Or some have cobbled together their own personal understanding of the biblical witness. A smaller percentage are faithful practitioners of other religious traditions or spiritual paths. My guess is that this is representative of many of the groups that you find yourself a part of, whether it's your workplace or school, neighborhood, or larger community. According to Pew Research, over the last 15 years, the share of U.S. adults who identify as Christian has dropped by 15 percentage points, going from 78% 15 years ago to 63% today. The share who are nuns, and that's N-O-N-E, not N-U-N, the share who are nuns have grown in kind, rising by 1 percentage point a year to nearly 30%. We could look at this as a crisis, and I suppose it is, in terms of church numbers and resources. But I also suggest to you that it represents a significant opportunity in terms of the importance and value of our shared calling to be fishers of people. To share the good news of the gospel with those who are hungering for healing, for justice, for deeper meaning, and for a love that knows no bounds. Believe me when I tell you, there is desperate need for what healthy and authentic spiritual community provides. So what does it look like to be fishers of people in this day and time of both religious suspicion and deep spiritual need? As I pondered this question, the image of one of those Jesus fish car magnets popped into my head. You might know that this was the secret symbol used by early Christians to signal their affiliation with the community, to self-identify as a follower of Jesus in a world where open proclamation carried the risk of persecution or even death. Now, the fish is easily recognizable as the shape of Jesus, and it proclaims a driver's religious identity. It may promote brand recognition, but it can't share the good news of the gospel from its position on the car bumper. So, what does Jesus-shaped evangelism look like? Well, I know that first and foremost, Jesus-shaped evangelism is relational. We are called to be in genuine relationships with the people around us, building trust as we practice the way of Jesus, the way of respect, compassion, service, and forgiveness. Showing up in the world and in our relationships with attitudes and behaviors consistent with who we profess to be as Christians speaks volumes, much louder than any words we might use. As we develop trust with others, then we can share our own story of faith with humility and authenticity, which opens space for conversation, questioning, and mutual discovery. I wonder if there's a person in your life right now that you might consider sharing some of your story with someday soon. Second, I believe that Jesus-shaped evangelism is invitational. The way of Christ is the way of love, and it brings hope, not fear of eternal condemnation. Coercion has no place in Jesus-shaped evangelism. Being fishers of people means inviting others into a relationship with Jesus, which is more focused on realizing abundant life in the here and now than in getting into heaven when we die. Author Samir Selmanovic, in his book, It's Really All About God, recounts how he asked an old rabbi, "Rabbi, what is Judaism teaching about eternal life? I don't hear you talking about it much, and I need to know." And the rabbi replies, "One world at a time, my friend. One world at a time." Selmanovic then shares his insight that Jesus, a Jewish rabbi, would have said the same thing. Is there an invitation you can extend that might open a doorway to hope and faith for someone in your life? Finally, Jesus-shaped evangelism is motivated by love. Truth be told, motivations for drawing others into the net of faith may not always be so pure. Sometimes ego drives the boat, and we cast out hoping to grow the church because we equate numbers with success. We might be driven by the satisfaction of landing a keeper, or be confused about whose job it is to reel in the catch. Just a hint, saving souls is way above our pay grade. Instead, we are simply called to love one another, which, I understand, is not so simple. Is there someone in your life who needs to know how much they are loved? How might you convey that to them this week? Here's the thing. When all is said and done, what I have come to understand as I have struggled with the question is that being fishers of people is really all about love. It is a manifestation of the love that God has for us. Evangelism that is Jesus-shaped is motivated by love, it manifests love, and it multiplies love as others are drawn in and set free. Catch and release Jesus style. I'm going fishing. You want to join me?